On a crisp autumn morning, the sun peeked through the clouds as Marcus Thompson arrived at JFK Airport in New York. Dressed in a simple hoodie and jeans, he blended seamlessly with the crowd of travelers bustling around him. His prized violin case hung from his shoulder, its worn leather exterior telling stories of countless performances across the globe. To anyone passing by, Marcus looked like just another passenger catching a flight to Los Angeles. No one could have guessed that this unassuming man was about to headline a billion-dollar world tour, a deal that had sent shockwaves through the music industry. Marcus preferred it this way. Despite his monumental success, he never sought the spotlight off stage. He liked being one of the people, finding comfort in anonymity during moments like these. As he stood in line for security, he exchanged small talk with fellow travelers, a family heading to Disneyland, a college student, returning home for the weekend, and even a chatty businessman eager to share tales of his latest venture. Each conversation reminded Marcus why he loved what he did, creating music that brought people together, regardless of their backgrounds. When it was finally time to board, Marcus made his way down the narrow aisle of the plane, scanning for his assigned seat in economy class. The rows were packed tightly, and the hum of engines filled the air as passengers shuffled to settle in. He slid into his window seat, placing his violin case carefully beside him. It wasn't just any instrument, it was custom-made, a masterpiece crafted by one of the finest luthiers in Italy. For Marcus, it represented years of sacrifice, hard work, and a lifelong dream realized. As the plane prepared for takeoff, the cabin buzzed with activity. Parents coaxed restless children into their seats while others scrolled through their phones or flipped through magazines. Nearby, two young women laughed over photos from a recent vacation, their excitement contagious. Marcus leaned back, closing his eyes for a moment, letting the energy of the flight wash over him. This short journey would carry him to Los Angeles, where rehearsals awaited for the biggest tour of his career. But for now, he was simply another face among hundreds, sharing space on a routine flight. Little did Marcus know, however, that this trip would become anything but ordinary. Moments later, a flight attendant approached his row, her attention drawn to the violin case resting near his feet. With a raised eyebrow and a smirk tugging at the corners of her lips, she gestured toward it. "What's this?" she asked, her voice carrying a playful yet mocking tone. "Another dreamer thinking they're going to make it big?" Her words lingered in the air, sharp enough to cut through the casual chatter of the cabin. Passengers nearby exchanged glances, some chuckling nervously at her comment. They assumed Marcus was just another aspiring musician, perhaps fresh out of school or chasing pipe dreams in a competitive industry. None of them suspected the truth, that the man sitting quietly before them was already living the dream. And not just any dream, but one so extraordinary that it had rewritten the rules of the music business itself. Yet, instead of reacting defensively, Marcus offered only a polite smile, choosing to let the remark slide. After all, he knew better than anyone that assumptions often said more about the person making them than the person receiving them. The plane rumbled down the runway, lifting into the sky as the cityscape below faded into distant dots. For Marcus, though, the turbulence wasn't confined to the weather outside. The flight attendant's words stirred memories of challenges he'd faced long before fame found him, reminders of how far he'd come and how much he'd overcome. Q. Flight attendant's comment hung in the air like an unwelcome guest, lingering far longer than anyone intended. Marcus felt the weight of her words, not because they stung, but because they carried a familiar echo, one he had heard countless times before. It was the sound of doubt, disguised as humor, wrapping itself around dreams and trying to squeeze them dry. He glanced up at the flight attendant, who seemed oblivious to the impact of her remark. Her smirk softened slightly as she noticed his calm demeanor. But the damage was done. Nearby passengers exchanged awkward glances, unsure whether to laugh along or stay silent. A middle-aged man seated across the aisle chuckled nervously, muttering something about how everyone thinks they're the next big thing. His tone wasn't cruel, but it carried a hint of dismissal, as if carrying a violin case automatically made someone less serious or credible. Others joined in with polite smiles, perhaps out of discomfort or simply to diffuse the tension. The atmosphere shifted subtly, becoming a mix of curiosity and quiet judgment. Marcus, however, didn't flinch. Instead, he leaned back in his seat, gripping the armrest lightly, and let the moment pass without confrontation. He'd learned long ago that defending himself against such comments rarely changed minds. It often only fueled more skepticism. Besides, there was something almost poetic about the irony of the situation. Here he was, flying coach despite having access to private jets, with a billion-dollar deal under his belt, yet still being underestimated by strangers who judged him, based on appearances alone. As the plane climbed higher, Marcus found himself reflecting on moments like this from his past. There had been countless occasions when people doubted his ambitions, teachers who suggested he focus on more practical careers, peers who teased him for practicing scales instead of playing sports, and even family members who worried he was wasting his potential. Each time their words had stung, but they also became fuel for his determination. He remembered one particular incident vividly, a high school guidance counselor telling him, "Classical music isn't exactly a lucrative path." Those words had burned in his chest, but they also ignited a fire within him, a relentless drive to prove that greatness could come from unexpected places. The flight attendant moved on after a few seconds, leaving Marcus to his thoughts. She continued down the aisle, helping other passengers stow their belongings and offering routine reminders about seatbelts and tray tables. To her, the exchange was likely already forgotten, just another light-hearted jab meant to break the monotony of a long day's work. But for Marcus, it served as a reminder of how pervasive stereotypes could be, even in seemingly harmless interactions. People assumed things about him all the time, that he couldn't possibly be successful because he played classical music, that he must be struggling since he traveled economy, or that his dreams were too lofty to ever come true. What struck Marcus most, though, wasn't the flight attendant's comment itself. It was the reaction of those around him. Some laughed. Nervously, others looked away, and a few seemed genuinely uncomfortable. No one spoke up, not even to offer a kind word or acknowledge the dismissive undertone of the remark. It was as if society had conditioned everyone to accept these small acts of belittlement as normal, brushing them off as insignificant. Yet, Marcus knew better. Words mattered. They shaped perceptions, influenced actions, and sometimes left scars that took years to heal. Still, he chose not to dwell on it. Instead, he turned his attention to the window, watching as fluffy white clouds drifted past. The sky stretched endlessly ahead, vast and open, much like the journey he'd been on for so many years. This flight, with its cramped seats and fleeting judgments, was merely a tiny chapter in a much larger story. And while the flight attendant may have seen only a man with a violin case, Marcus knew who he truly was. A trailblazer, a creator, and someone who had defied every odd stacked against him. For now, though, he decided to keep that knowledge to himself. After all, some stories are best told when the timing is right. And Marcus had always believed in letting actions speak louder than words. The flight attendant's comment lingered in Marcus's mind, not because it hurt, but because it transported him back to a time when such remarks felt like walls he couldn't climb. As the plane soared above the clouds, Marcus closed his eyes and let his thoughts drift to his childhood, a simpler yet tougher era of his life. Growing up in a small apartment on the south side of Chicago, Marcus had learned early on that dreams came with a price tag, one his family could barely afford. His mother, Linda, worked tirelessly as a nurse during the day and cleaned offices at night just to make ends meet. She was a woman of quiet strength, always encouraging Marcus and his younger sister to aim high, even when resources were low. When Marcus showed an interest in music at age 6, Linda scraped together enough money for a second-hand violin from a pawn shop. It wasn't much, its strings were frayed and the bow needed rehairing, but to young Marcus it was magic. Every note he coaxed out of that instrument felt like a step closer to something extraordinary. But not everyone shared Linda's optimism. At school, Marcus often faced ridicule for playing the violin. "Why don't you play football like everyone else?" kids would tease. Or at least learn guitar. You might actually get cool points. The teasing wasn't malicious, but it stung nonetheless. Music teachers weren't always supportive either. One instructor once told him, "Classical music is beautiful, but let's be honest, it's not exactly a career path for someone like you." Someone like him. Those 4 words stuck with Marcus, embedding themselves deep within his psyche. They implied limitations based on where he came from, the color of his skin, and the modest circumstances of his upbringing. Despite the naysayers, Marcus poured himself into his craft. He practiced relentlessly, often late into the night, using headphones so he wouldn't disturb his sleeping family. On weekends, he performed on street corners, earning tips from passers-by while honing his skills under the watchful eyes of strangers. Some offered praise, others walked by without a glance. But each performance taught him resilience, teaching him to embrace rejection as part of the journey rather than its end. One pivotal moment came during his teenage years when Marcus auditioned for a prestigious youth orchestra. He prepared tirelessly, perfecting every scale and arpeggio until his fingers ached. Yet when the results were announced, his name wasn't on the list. Devastated, he considered giving up altogether. That's when his mother sat him down and said, "Marcus, talent doesn't care about lists or titles. If you believe in your gift, no one can take that away from you." Her words reignited his determination, pushing him to keep going despite setbacks. Years later, as Marcus sat on that crowded plane, he realized how far those lessons had carried him. The doubters, the dismissive comments, and the endless obstacles, they hadn't broken him. Instead, they had shaped him into the artist he was today. Each challenge became a stepping stone, leading him toward opportunities he once thought impossible. From performing in dimly lit subway stations to selling out arenas, Marcus's journey was proof that perseverance could rewrite the narrative written by skeptics. Yet, what struck Marcus most was how pervasive doubt remained, even after all his achievements. People still judged him based on surface-level impressions, the clothes he wore, the way he traveled, or the instrument he carried. It reminded him that success didn't shield anyone from prejudice. In fact, it sometimes amplified it, forcing him to constantly prove himself in spaces where others assumed he didn't belong. As the hum of the engines filled the cabin, Marcus opened his eyes and glanced around. Passengers were engrossed in books, movies, or conversations, unaware of the storm of memories swirling inside him. For a brief moment, he considered speaking up, not to boast about his accomplishments, but to remind them that everyone carries unseen battles and untold stories. But he decided against it. Sometimes silence spoke louder than words, and besides, Marcus knew better than anyone that actions had a way of silencing critics far more effectively than arguments ever could. As the plane cruised smoothly through the sky, Marcus's mind shifted from the struggles of his past to the remarkable journey that had brought him to this point. The flight attendant's earlier comment now seemed almost ironic, given the heights he'd reached in an industry where few believed he belonged. Marcus allowed himself a small private smile as he reflected on how far his unique sound and relentless determination had taken him. It wasn't just luck or talent that had propelled Marcus into the spotlight. It was his ability to innovate. Early in his career, he realized that sticking to traditional classical music wouldn't set him apart in a crowded field. He began experimenting, blending intricate violin melodies with beats inspired by hip-hop, jazz, and even electronic music. At first, critics dismissed his work as too unconventional, warning him that audiences wouldn't understand it. But Marcus trusted his instincts. He knew there was power in breaking boundaries, in creating something entirely new that could bridge gaps between genres and generations. His big break came unexpectedly one rainy afternoon when he decided to perform on a busy New York City street corner. With rain drizzling around him and pedestrians rushing past, Marcus played a mashup of Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata and Drake's God's Plan. The combination was jarring yet mesmerizing, stopping people in their tracks. A young woman, filming the performance, uploaded the video to social media, captioning it, "This guy is redefining what music can be." Within hours, the clip went viral, racking up millions of views and sparking conversations worldwide. Suddenly, Marcus wasn't just another street performer. He was a sensation. Record labels came knocking soon after, eager to sign the man behind the viral hit. But Marcus didn't jump at the first offer. He wanted more than fame. He wanted creative control. After months of negotiations, he signed with a forward-thinking label that allowed him to stay true to his vision. His debut album, Strings Unbound Iron, debuted at #1 on multiple charts, earning critical acclaim for its bold fusion of styles. Tracks like Symphony of the Streets became anthems, resonating with fans across demographics and defying genre labels altogether. The success of Strings Unbound catapulted Marcus onto global stages. From sold-out shows at Carnegie Hall to electrifying performances at Coachella, he proved that his music transcended cultural barriers. Critics who once doubted him now hailed him as a visionary, while audiences couldn't get enough of his dynamic live shows. During concerts, Marcus often invited local musicians to join him on stage, turning each performance into a collaborative celebration of artistry. This inclusivity endeared him to fans, solidifying his reputation not just as a musician but as a unifier. Then came the deal that changed everything: a historic $1 billion touring contract, the largest in music history. It wasn't just about the money. It was validation of his hard work and innovation. The tour would span 5 continents, feature state-of-the-art production, and introduce his genre-bending sound to millions of new listeners. For Marcus, it was a dream realized, proof that staying true to himself had paid off in ways he never imagined. Yet despite the accolades and wealth, Marcus remained grounded. He still carried his old violin case, refusing to upgrade to something flashier. To him, it was a symbol of his roots, a reminder of where he started and how far he'd come. Success hadn't erased the lessons of humility and perseverance instilled in him by his mother, and reinforced by years of rejection. If anything, it deepened his appreciation for every milestone. As Marcus sat on the plane, reflecting on these achievements, he felt a profound sense of gratitude. None of this would have been possible without the doubters who underestimated him, the supporters who believed in him, and the challenges that tested his resolve. Every note he played, every stage he graced, and every life he touched was part of a story bigger than himself. A story of resilience, creativity, and the power of believing in your own potential. For a moment, Marcus glanced at the other passengers, wondering if any of them harbored dreams as audacious as his once were. He hoped they did. Because if there was one thing Marcus Thompson knew for certain, it was this: greatness often hides in plain sight, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. And sometimes all it takes is one person brave enough to believe in the impossible. Midway through the flight, as the initial buzz of takeoff had settled into a steady hum, Marcus felt a tap on his shoulder. Turning slightly, he found himself face to face with a teenager seated behind him. The boy looked about 16, wearing oversized headphones and clutching a phone in his hand. His expression was a mix of excitement and nervousness. "Excuse me," the teen began hesitantly, leaning forward. "Are you Marcus Thompson?" For a moment, Marcus was caught off guard. He wasn't used to being recognized in such casual settings, especially when he made an effort to blend in. But then he noticed the screen of the boy's phone. It displayed a recent news article about his billion-dollar tour deal, complete with a photo of him holding his violin on stage. Smiling warmly, Marcus nodded. "Yeah, that's me," he said, softly, not wanting to draw too much attention. The teen's eyes widened and he nearly dropped his phone in disbelief. "No way," he exclaimed, just loud enough for nearby passengers to overhear. "I can't believe I'm sitting next to you. My sister is obsessed with your music. She's gonna freak out when I tell her." Without missing a beat, the boy asked if he could take a selfie. Marcus agreed, shifting slightly in his seat so they could capture the moment. Within seconds, the flash went off and the image was saved forever. A candid snapshot of an ordinary flight turned extraordinary. Word spread quickly down the aisle. A woman in the row ahead turned around, curiosity lighting up her face. "Wait, are you really Marcus Thompson?" she asked, her voice tinged with awe. When Marcus confirmed, She gasped audibly, immediately pulling out her own phone to show him a playlist filled with his songs. "I listen to your music every day while I run," she confessed. "It keeps me going." Soon others joined in. A businessman who had earlier chuckled at the flight attendant's comment now leaned over, sheepishly admitting he'd heard Marcus's mashups during his morning commutes. Even the two young women who had laughed about their vacation photos earlier approached shyly, asking for autographs. Passengers who had previously dismissed Marcus as just another traveler were now realizing they were sharing airspace with someone truly remarkable. Amid the growing attention, Marcus remained calm and approachable, graciously engaging with each person. He answered questions about his creative process, shared stories from his tours, and encouraged budding musicians to trust their instincts. His humility only added to the magic of the moment, leaving everyone feeling seen and valued. Meanwhile, the flight attendant who had mocked Marcus earlier watched the scene unfold from the front of the cabin. Her cheeks flushed red as she pieced together what was happening. The man she had assumed was a struggling dreamer was, in fact, a global icon. She glanced at the violin case resting near his feet and felt a pang of regret. What must he think of her now? Would he call her out or demand an apology mid-flight? She braced herself for the worst, but couldn't bring herself to interrupt the whirlwind of admiration surrounding him. As the minutes passed, the energy aboard the plane transformed completely. Strangers introduced themselves to one another, bonding over their shared appreciation for Marcus's music. A grandmother sitting across the aisle proudly declared that her grandson played the violin too, though nowhere near as well as Marcus. Laughter and chatter replaced the earlier awkwardness, creating a sense of community among passengers who might otherwise have never interacted. For Marcus, this unexpected turn of events was both surreal and heartwarming. He had always believed that music brought people together, but seeing it happen firsthand in such an unlikely setting reinforced why he did what he did. Fame wasn't about recognition or applause, it was about connection. And here, thousands of feet above the ground, he was doing exactly that, bridging divides and reminding everyone on board of the beauty of shared humanity. By the time the excitement began to settle, Marcus knew this flight would stay etched in his memory, not because of the initial insult, but because of how it ended. What started as a routine journey had become something far greater, a reminder that even in the most ordinary moments, life has a way of surprising us in the best possible ways. As the excitement in the cabin began to settle, Marcus noticed the flight attendant approaching him once again. This time her demeanor was markedly different. Gone was the playful smirk and casual tone. Instead, she looked visibly uneasy, her steps hesitant as she made her way down the aisle. When she reached his row, she paused, clearly struggling to find the right words. "Mr. Thompson," she started, her voice softer than before. I just wanted to say." She trailed off, glancing at the violin case resting near his feet. The weight of her earlier comment hung unspoken between them, but Marcus could see the sincerity in her eyes. Finally, she managed to continue. "I had no idea who you were when I made that remark earlier. I'm so sorry if it came across the wrong way. It was thoughtless, and I feel terrible about it." Marcus met her apology with a calm, understanding smile. He didn't hesitate to respond. "It's okay," he said gently. "We all make assumptions sometimes. It's part of being human. What matters is how we grow from them." His tone carried no trace of bitterness or resentment, only warmth and empathy. For a moment, the two locked eyes, and the flight attendant seemed to relax slightly, though her cheeks remained flushed with embarrassment. Her apology spread a ripple effect through the cabin. Passengers who overheard the exchange nodded approvingly, some even murmuring their agreement with Marcus's words. The businessman who had chuckled earlier leaned over and quietly admitted, "That's class right there." The grandmother across the aisle smiled knowingly, while the teenager who had first recognized Marcus gave him an admiring thumbs up. For the flight attendant, this brief interaction became a turning point. She returned to her duties with renewed purpose, treating every passenger with extra care and respect for the remainder of the flight. It wasn't just about making amends, it was about learning from the experience. As she handed out snacks and beverages, she found herself reflecting on how easy it was to judge others based on appearances or preconceived notions. That simple encounter with Marcus reminded her why compassion and humility mattered so much in her line of work. Back in his seat, Marcus felt a quiet sense of fulfillment. He hadn't sought to embarrass or shame the flight attendant for her earlier remark. Instead, he chose grace, knowing that everyone makes mistakes. To him, forgiveness wasn't just an act of kindness. It was an opportunity to inspire change. By responding with understanding rather than anger, he hoped to leave a lasting impression not just on her but on everyone watching. The atmosphere aboard the plane shifted subtly after that. Conversations resumed, but they carried a newfound warmth and connection. Strangers continued to share stories, laughter, and even playlists inspired by Marcus's music. A group of passengers seated near the back decided to pool their headphones and listen to one of his albums together, their heads bobbing in sync with the rhythm. Even the flight attendant joined in occasionally, offering recommendations for tracks she thought others might enjoy. As the hours passed, Marcus couldn't help but marvel at how quickly perceptions could shift. Just a few short hours ago, he had been dismissed as just another traveler with a violin case. Now he was surrounded by people who saw him not only as an artist, but also as someone willing to extend kindness despite being wronged. It reinforced his belief that life's most meaningful moments often stemmed from unexpected interactions, those small, fleeting exchanges that had the power to transform perspectives. By the time the captain announced their descent into Los Angeles, the cabin buzzed with a palpable sense of camaraderie. Passengers exchanged contact information, promising to stay in touch or attend one of Marcus's upcoming concerts. Some even joked about forming a fan club dedicated to supporting underappreciated musicians. The flight attendant, now noticeably more at ease, thanked Marcus personally as he prepared to disembark, her gratitude genuine and heartfelt. For Marcus, the journey served as a powerful reminder of something he'd always believed, that every person carries a story worth hearing. Whether it's the teenager dreaming of stardom, the grandmother recalling memories tied to music, or the flight attendant learning to see beyond surface impressions, each individual has the potential to surprise, inspire, and connect. And sometimes, all it takes is a little patience and a lot of grace to uncover those hidden layers. As the plane touched down at Los Angeles International Airport, Marcus gathered his belongings and prepared to disembark. The violin case, still slung over his shoulder, felt lighter somehow. Not because its physical weight had changed, but because of the emotional shift that had occurred during the flight. What had started as a routine trip had transformed into something far more meaningful, a reminder of the power of humility, connection, and second chances. When the seatbelt sign dinged off and passengers began unloading their overhead bins, the energy in the cabin remained electric. Strangers who had bonded over Marcus's music lingered in the aisles, exchanging phone numbers and social media handles. A few even joked about forming a Marcus Thompson fan club for future meetups. The teenager who first recognized him insisted on taking one last selfie before parting ways, promising to show it to his sister later that evening. "She's gonna lose her mind," he said with a grin, shaking Marcus's hand enthusiastically. The flight attendant stood near the exit door, her posture stiff but sincere as she bid farewell to each passenger. When Marcus approached, she extended her hand hesitantly, unsure if he'd accept her gesture after their earlier encounter. To her relief, Marcus shook it firmly, offering another warm smile. "Thank you for your kindness," she said softly, her voice trembling slightly. "And thank you for reminding me how important it is to treat everyone with respect." Her words carried genuine remorse, and Marcus nodded in acknowledgement. "We all have room to grow," he replied simply. "I appreciate your apology. It takes courage to admit when we're wrong." Stepping off the plane, Marcus was greeted by a scene that contrasted sharply with the quiet anonymity he had enjoyed on board. A crowd of fans and reporters waited eagerly at the gate, cameras flashing like strobe lights as they caught sight of him. Cheers erupted as he walked through the jet bridge, his name echoing through the terminal. For many travelers exiting behind him, this was their first glimpse of the man they had just met, a global superstar whose presence commanded admiration and awe. Some whispered excitedly among themselves, while others stopped to watch in amazement as Marcus graciously posed for photos and signed autographs. Back on the plane, the flight attendant lingered silently in her seat, watching the commotion unfold from afar. She replayed the events of the flight in her mind. The careless remark, the realization of who Marcus truly was, and the gracious way he had handled everything. It was a lesson she wouldn't soon forget. In an industry where interactions were often fleeting and impersonal, she resolved to approach every passenger with greater empathy and mindfulness moving forward. After all, you never knew whose life you might be touching, or what incredible stories they carried within them. Meanwhile, Marcus navigated the throng of well-wishers with practiced ease, balancing professionalism with authenticity. He thanked fans for their support, shared quick anecdotes about his journey, and promised to deliver unforgettable performances during his upcoming tour. But despite the chaos surrounding him, his thoughts kept drifting back to the flight. Those brief hours in the air had reminded him of why he loved what he did. Not just for the fame or accolades, but for the human connections forged along the way. Every handshake, every smile, and every story shared reinforced his belief that music had the power to transcend barriers and unite people across cultures and backgrounds. By the time Marcus finally stepped into a waiting car, the sun was beginning to set over the Los Angeles skyline, casting golden hues across the city. As he sank into the plush leather seat, he allowed himself a moment of reflection. The day had been unexpectedly eventful, filled with moments both challenging and heartwarming. Yet it was precisely those contrasts that made life so rich and unpredictable. From the dismissive comment aboard the plane to the outpouring of recognition upon landing, Marcus had experienced firsthand the spectrum of human behavior, and emerged stronger for it. For the flight attendant, the businessman, the teenager, and everyone else involved, the journey would leave an indelible mark. Each person carried a piece of the story with them, whether it was a newfound appreciation for resilience, a lesson in humility, or simply the joy of discovering something extraordinary in the ordinary. And as Marcus gazed out the window at the sprawling city below, he couldn't help but feel grateful for the music that connected him to the world, and for the endless possibilities that lay ahead. In the days that followed, Marcus found himself reflecting deeply on the events of that flight. It wasn't just the flight attendant's comment or the subsequent recognition from passengers that stayed with him. It was the broader lesson embedded in those moments. The incident had reminded him of something he often shared during interviews. Assumptions are inevitable, but they don't define us. What truly matters is how we respond to them, and whether we allow others the grace to grow. During a live TV appearance to promote his upcoming tour, Marcus decided to share the story, not to shame anyone involved, but to highlight the importance of kindness and open-mindedness. Sitting across from the host in a cozy studio setting, Marcus recounted the details with his signature humility. It was a simple interaction, he explained, leaning forward slightly as if confiding in a close friend. Someone made an assumption about me based on my violin case, and honestly, I understood why. We all do it. It's human nature. But what stood out to me was how quickly things shifted when people realized who I was. It reminded me that everyone has dreams, struggles, and stories we can't see unless we take the time to listen. The audience erupted into applause, moved by his perspective. Social media lit up almost instantly, with viewers praising Marcus for turning what could have been a negative experience into a teachable moment. Hashtags like "Cheers Grace Over Judgment" and "Just See the Music" began trending, sparking conversations about breaking stereotypes and treating others with dignity. Teachers used the story in classrooms to discuss empathy. Workplaces incorporated it into training sessions about unconscious bias. Even late-night talk show hosts joked about carrying violin cases to avoid being underestimated, a lighthearted nod to Marcus's influence. For the flight attendant, the ripple effects were equally profound. Though her name was never publicly Mentioned, she recognized herself in Marcus's retelling and felt both relieved and inspired. She reached out to her supervisor, suggesting new initiatives to foster inclusivity and awareness among the airline staff. "We're not just serving passengers," she wrote in her proposal. "We're interacting with people whose lives might be more extraordinary than we realize." Her ideas were implemented company-wide, earning praise from colleagues and customers alike. As for the passengers on that flight, many carried the experience with them long after landing. The teenager who first identified Marcus started practicing the violin again, reigniting a passion he'd set aside due to self-doubt. The grandmother shared the story with her grandson, encouraging him to pursue his musical ambitions despite obstacles. And the businessman? He began attending local concerts, discovering a love for genre-blending performances that reminded him of Marcus's work. Each person took something unique away from the encounter, weaving it into their own life's narrative. For Marcus, the story became a cornerstone of his message as he embarked on his billion-dollar tour. At every stop, he dedicated a portion of his performance to celebrating resilience and connection. During one particularly memorable concert in London, he invited aspiring musicians from underserved communities to join him on stage, giving them a platform to showcase their talents. "This is what music is about," he told the cheering crowd, "lifting each other up, creating space for dreams to flourish, and reminding ourselves that greatness comes in all forms." By the end of the tour, Marcus's impact extended far beyond ticket sales and chart-topping albums. He had sparked a global movement rooted in empathy, challenging people to look beyond surface impressions and embrace the unseen potential in everyone they met. Schools, community centers, and even corporations adopted themes from his journey, using them as frameworks for fostering understanding and collaboration. Looking back, Marcus knew that none of this would have happened without the chain of events aboard that seemingly ordinary flight. From the dismissive comment to the heartfelt apology, each moment had played a role in shaping the narrative. Life, he realized, was full of these small yet significant encounters, opportunities to learn, grow, and inspire change. And so, as Marcus stood backstage after the final show of his record-breaking tour, he smiled to himself. The violin case rested at his feet once more, its worn leather telling stories of perseverance, triumph, and humanity. For Marcus Thompson, the journey was never just about making music. It was about making connections. And in doing so, he had proven that even the simplest interactions could leave a legacy far greater than anyone imagined.